Also, on that last night, Jesus turned to Jehovah, not to alcohol. So we don't want to rely or become dependent on alcohol to cope with stress. That is not an appropriate way to address the stress.
Hello, wonderful people of the internet. Welcome back to the Anthony Morris Returns channel. My name is Chaka, and in this video, I will be taking you through a video that has been leaked to me by a Bethel insider, and this video is a recording of a United States branch Bethel Elders meeting. So this is a meeting to which all elders who serve as part of the United States Bethel, so these could be full-time Bethel members, these could be Bethel commuters, these could be construction volunteers. If you have the designation of an elder and you have some affiliation to Bethel, whether full-time or part-time, they were invited to this meeting. So this meeting consists of some opening remarks by a chairman who's so all the presenters were members of the United States branch committee, as far as I could gather. So there was some opening remarks by one of these branch committee members, and then there was a series consisting of 3 talks by 3 other branch committee members on the United States branch committee. And some of the revelations that are given in this video are quite not very shocking, but it was surprising that these could be stated from the platform, and we actually have some evidence of some of the problems they have there at Bethel, and some of the things that were spoken about were quite surprising that they had to discuss this with Bethelites. And bear in mind the importance they were attaching to this meeting, given that only people who are elders were invited to this meeting. So other Bethelites who are maybe ministerial servants or don't have an appointment in the congregation, or female Bethelites, were not invited to this meeting. So quite surprising, some of the things they comment on. So let's roll the intro and let's get into it.
But you can't do that, said one of the critics.
That doesn't bother me.
Really? Again? Really?
Look at that little enemy of God.
Somehow we dilly-and-dally, takes us years, and we wonder why.
What are you waiting for?
Thank you, Brother Franken, for that beautiful prayer. Well, once again, we say welcome to everyone here in attendance. These annual meetings for elders that serve at Bethel and support of Bethel are always a highlight for us each and every year, and today is no different. Under the direction of the governing body, the branch committee prepares a program and outlines specifically with us as elders in mind. And so we know that you will certainly benefit from the program today. But to begin, just on behalf of the U.S. Branch Committee, we want to express appreciation to all of you brothers for all that you do in caring for Jehovah's precious sheep. We know you brothers are very busy. You carry a heavy load of responsibility, but we appreciate all that you do, the attention that you give to our brothers and sisters. So we say thank you to all you brothers for all that you do in caring for the brothers and sisters, what you've done and will continue to do on into the future as shepherds. Now, we're confident you're going to enjoy the program that's been prepared for us today. And throughout the program, you're going to see Jehovah's love and concern for all of his sheep. That includes us as elders. It's true we're shepherds, but we're also sheep. And you'll see that concern expressed for us as elders also carried out through our program today. Just to give you an overview, we have 3 talks that have been prepared. And just to go through them briefly, first we're going to hear a talk with the title, Managing Stress While Shouldering Responsibilities. Managing Stress While Shouldering Responsibilities. As we said, you brothers shoulder heavy responsibilities. Many of you serve as overseers or coordinators here at Bethel or in your assignments in support of Bethel. You're also elders in the congregation, caring for those. Many of you are married. Some in our listening audience have families. Many of you also carry out responsibilities on the circuit, the convention level, and at times we can feel stressed, right? Anxious, overwhelmed. How am I going to care for all of these things I'm being asked to do? So I think all of us will look forward to that talk, find it beneficial to help us manage and shoulder our responsibilities.
So it wouldn't be a Jehovah's Witness event if there was no governing body worship. So right off, that was Tracy Figlinski, who is, as far as I understand, a member of the United States Branch Committee, and he's chairing this event. And in his opening remarks, he just had to give some credit to the governing body, even though it sounds like this program is actually literally arranged by the branch committee, in that they decide what the subjects are going to be, they write the outlines for those subjects, and they present those outlines, but he still had to involve some governing body worship in his opening remarks. Now, he mentions one of the talks, which he actually gives quite a lot of detail to, which is the first talk entitled Managing Stress While Shouldering Responsibility. And it's just surprising to me how the organization and the leaders in this organization lack self-awareness. So he is actually describing the things that cause Bethelites to feel stressed, and he mentions that they have stress related to the assignments at Bethel. But it's not enough for you just to be a Bethelite. It's not enough for you to be dedicating all your time, all your working time, for which you're not actually getting any actual payment. So they look after your basic needs, yes, but you're not getting any remuneration for doing all that free labor for the organization full time. But it's not enough that you're doing that work full time. You also have to handle responsibilities. So you have to have responsibilities in the congregation. You have to have responsibilities in the circuit. You have to have responsibilities related to convention organization. And then they wonder why people are stressed. And then they're talking about people being stressed, but they're forgetting that they're actually creating a very stressful environment. And I actually have quite a bit to say about the actual talk. So, but I just thought the opening remarks also needed to be commented on in terms of the lack of self-awareness that this organization has with regards to the responsibility they have for people experiencing stress, people who are under their care, serving there at Bethel.
Our second talk is entitled Reduce the Distance with Those Working Remotely. So reduce the distance with those working remotely. So many of our departments now are relying more and more on remote volunteers and remote servants. So just the nature of that can make one feel isolated from their department or from the family or from Bethel. So we'll hear some nice practical suggestions on how we can help these ones that are remotely helping us to feel more part of our team, our department, or our Bethel family.
Now, apparently, the fact that people work remotely warrants a discussion at a Bethel Elders meeting. So the reality is it's not just Bethel that is faced with this situation where people have to work remotely. This is just the age in which we live in, that has made it easier to employ people, to recruit people without needing a physical office space for these people. So apparently this is now such a big problem that the organization is facing that they have to dedicate a whole talk at a Bethel Elders meeting to address this distance with their remote volunteers. And also this thing is something that they're discussing with elders when they actually have remote volunteers who are female. They have people who are maybe coordinating some of the work of these remote volunteers who are female and are in this organization, or even the others who are not elders who are involved in this remote work. But this is such a grand thing that only US Bethel elders are invited to listen to this information as to how to work effectively with people who are working remotely from yourself.
And then finally, we're going to have our principal talk entitled Know Well the Appearance of Your Flock. So this talk is going to give us some good reminders on how we can stay alert to the spiritual condition of each of the sheep under our care, and then also how we can assist them to continue to make spiritual advancement.
So if I'm being honest, the talk that's being referred to as the principal talk is actually the worst of all these talks in terms of just how boring and how dull it is. But I do have some comments on that final talk as well, just because there are just some revelations in there in terms of some of the issues that are being faced at Bethel, which is sort of this spiritual paradise where you have the cream of the cream in terms of the spirituality that are invited to serve at Bethel. So I do have a few comments on it, but not as many comments as with regards to the talk to do with stress, for example. So anyway, let's move on with the program.
Leading off for us, we have Brother Chad Raper with his theme, Managing Stress While Shouldering Responsibilities.
Does your stress feel like a roller coaster or a freight train? Mismanaged stress can feel like a wild roller coaster ride, full of ups and downs, highs and lows. Maybe feels like things could get a little out of control or go off the rails.
He has this, it's a thing that some Jehovah's Witness speakers do, where they have this illustration. They think that's evidence of being a very good speaker when you have this illustration that then you just use throughout your talk. And he's got this illustration of a roller coaster and a freight train, and he's basically suggesting that your stress should not be like a roller coaster, it should be like a freight train. And I just find the illustration itself inappropriate and ineffective, because those two things play completely different roles, and they can be appropriate if they're in the correct setting. So if you are at a theme park and you get onto the roller coaster, you don't expect to have the experience of somebody on a freight train. And in fact, you would be quite disappointed and frustrated if you went to a theme park and your roller coaster moved like a freight train. On the other hand, if you were on a freight train, or you were, I don't know why you would be on a freight train unless you were one of the crew. You don't expect a freight train to behave like a roller coaster. And in fact, if it started behaving like a roller coaster, then that could be extremely worrying and it could be extremely concerning. But he keeps using this illustration throughout his talk, which I think is a very poor illustration. But the leaders of this organization can literally just get away with murder.
And if you think about a roller coaster, it doesn't get you very far. You end up right where you started. Or as Matthew 6:27 puts it, who of you by being anxious can add 1 cubit to his lifespan? On the other hand, well-managed stress is like a stable, steady freight train. It can travel great distances, carrying heavy loads. It's under stress, but it has good momentum, moving forward towards a destination.
So there he goes again, and you're going to hear more and more about this freight train and the roller coaster. And as I've already argued, I don't think it's an appropriate illustration. I don't think it's fitting to the subject that he's discussing. But the other thing I just wanted to comment on is, this guy, he seems like a relatively young guy. I mean, he could potentially be in his 30s like myself, or he could be in his early 40s. I just don't see him being in his late 40s or even in his 50s. But who knows? Maybe if somebody knows him personally or has an idea of how old he could be, you could put that in the comments. But he just seems like one of those people who has risen fairly quickly in the organization. He's potentially one of those people that was baptized at a very young age. He's gone to Bethel maybe at 19. He's maybe become an elder very young, maybe in his early 20s, and he's just risen in the organization rapidly, and he's just so self-assured, he's so confident, and dare I say, he sounds extremely arrogant. And even the way he talks to his audience, it's not like he's talking to his equals. He's talking in such a way like he is above them, and he's the one that's giving them this information, and they should take that information. And this is what you get when people rise to these positions of responsibility, when they have no actual credentials, they have no actual qualifications, and this just gets to their heads to the extent that they exude this. I mean, I guess what he's trying to demonstrate is like this confidence and this ability as a speaker, but it just comes across as extremely arrogant.
Consider the greatest example of well-managed stress at Luke 22:44. Please turn with me to Luke 22:44. Here at Luke 22, we have Jesus on the last night of his life. His own everlasting life is on the line. The weight of the entire human family is on his shoulders. Note how intense the stress was for Jesus at Luke 22:44. It says, "But he was in such agony that he kept praying more earnestly, and his sweat became as drops of blood falling to the ground." The emotional stress must have been enormous for Jesus. In fact, the study note on this verse says that it's possible that the stress was so extreme for Jesus that he experienced hematidrosis, literally having blood in his sweat.
So a couple of things to mention there. So he talks about this being an example of well-managed stress, and then he talks about the source of this stress. He talks about the weight of this responsibility of the future of the entire human race being on Jesus's shoulders. Now, this is something that the Jehovah's Witness leaders actually write into the Bible. This idea is not in the Bible. The Jehovah's Witnesses have this idea that if Jesus had not stayed faithful to the death, if he had not kept his integrity until his very death, then that would have nullified the possibility of humans ever living forever. It would have meant that humans would have been doomed forever. But that idea is not in the Bible at all. The idea you find in the Bible is that, yes, humans were sinful, they inherited sin from Adam, and yes, Jesus had to die for humans, but there is no such idea of if Jesus did not maintain his integrity, if he said or did something inappropriate during the last hours leading up to his death, then that would have meant that humankind would have been doomed forever. Does that mean that God does not have the power to create another solution if Jesus was not able to provide this sacrifice that was needed? I don't know what the idea is there. I think what they suggest is if Jesus said something sinful in those last hours, that would have nullified his sacrifice, but that is nowhere to be found in the Bible. But the other thing he talks about is he's referred to this example as well-managed stress, and just in the interest of not making this a too lengthy video, I'm not gonna go into those scriptures, but I just don't see how this is an example of well-managed stress, because the scriptures he's reading there shows that the stress was so intense, as he himself has said, that Jesus's sweat turned into drops of blood. That's what the Bible tells us. So if your stress increases to such a level where your sweat becomes as drops of blood, I don't see how that is well-managed stress. I would say that is stress that is going out of control. And I do try sometimes just to fact check these Jehovah's Witness speakers when they make some statements. So he has referred to this condition as hematidrosis, and I just wondered whether he was making it up. So what I did is I googled it, and actually he's not making this condition up, and the writers of the study Bible and the study note, they're not making it up. So I'm just going to share on my screen. This is the website WebMD. So WebMD is actually a website you can trust. It's not the nicest in the layout because there's adverts on there, which makes it quite difficult to sometimes to navigate the actual website. But this is information that has been written and it's been reviewed by a medical doctor. So you can see there it says medically reviewed by Nayana Amhardeka, and this is a medical doctor. So you can actually trust this information as being legit. And I'm really sorry for the graphics. The software that I'm using to create this video sort of is not the best in terms of the graphics you see on the screen. But let's just go through this article briefly. So it asks, the title is "What is hematidrosis?" which Dean Raper has referred to there. And it says here that it references Jesus sweating blood. then it tells us there that hematidrosis or hematohydrosis is a very rare medical condition that causes you to ooze or sweat blood from your skin when you're not cut or injured. Only a few handfuls of hematidrosis cases were confirmed in medical studies in the 20th century. So it's so rare that in a whole century, you only have a few cases. And it tells us there that it usually happens on or around the face, but it can also come from the mucosa inside the nose, mouth, or stomach. There's also crying tears of blood is a related condition. Hematidrosis can look like bloody sweat, or sweat with droplets of blood in it. So it is an actual thing. The bleeding usually stops on its own. It says here that doctors don't really know what triggers it, but it could be related to your body's fight or flight response. So stress could definitely trigger this. Then it goes on to say that hematidrosis can be a symptom of other diseases such as high blood pressure or bleeding disorders. It's happened to women while they've had their periods. Sometimes it could be caused by extreme distress or fear, such as facing death, torture, or severe ongoing abuse. It's probably where the term sweating blood, meaning a great effort, comes from. So it is understandable that this could have happened with Jesus, although some scholars do argue whether that was not just inserted, that particular verse about him sweating blood. But apparently it seems like from an actual reliable medical source that is an actual medical condition, or something that is known to happen medically, and it arises from severe stress. So the fact that Jesus' stress got to the level that he was actually sweating blood, I just don't see how you can say that is well-managed stress, because you can have stress and you can manage it earlier so as to prevent it from it escalating to a point where somebody feels so desperate. So I don't agree that is an example of well-managed stress that Dean Raper is going to, is it Dan or Dean Raper, that is going to appeal to as an example of managing stress well.
But Jesus handled the stress like a freight train. How so? By gritting his teeth and powering through in his own strength? Well, no, look back at the verse 44. It says, but he was in such agony that he kept praying. He kept praying. So Jesus prayed, and then he prayed some more, and then he continued to persist in prayer. He kept praying, showing a steady reliance on Jehovah. And as the stress got really intense, what did Jesus do? Well, look at the verse again, verse 44. But he was in such agony that he kept praying more earnestly. So as the stress rose, well, Jesus' reliance on Jehovah rose to match. This steady reliance on Jehovah carried Jesus to the ultimate destination of perfect integrity to God to the point of death. The lesson? Jesus was able to shoulder responsibility while managing incredibly intense stress through reliance on Jehovah.
Right. So the problem with Jehovah's Witnesses, not just the speakers, but it's actually I could call it a systemic issue in the religion, is they always pick a Bible verse out of context, and then they use that verse to push their own agenda. So they have certain ideas. The Jehovah's Witnesses don't come the approach to the Bible is not, we're going to read the Bible and then we will get some ideas of what we want to address or what we want to talk about or a theme that we want to address. What they do is they have a theme in mind and then they look for scriptures and they cherry pick their scriptures specifically so that whatever scriptures they pick are actually in line with their thoughts and their own personal ideas. And this is a classic example of this, where he has picked this example of Jesus and what he's doing in order to manage his stress, but he conveniently forgets to tell you what Jesus was praying about. So when you read those verses, and I'm not going to bring up the scriptures and read through them, but when you read the context, what Jesus was actually asking God, if we were to accept that Jesus knew beforehand that he was going to be executed, he was asking God to take that away from him. He was saying, take that cup away from me. He was literally begging God to stop this process that would lead to his execution and him dying a very shameful death, and a very painful death at that. But Dan Raper doesn't want to tell us that. He conveniently removes that. He doesn't even, he just fixates on this verse and talks about why Jesus was praying, what Jesus was doing when he was in agony. And the reason why his agony was arising was because what he was praying for was not happening. This is why his stress was rising. It's not like God was intervening and preventing whoever was coming to arrest him, preventing whoever was planning to be involved in his execution from happening. That was not happening, and this is what made Jesus become more and more stressed. And even if we were to sort of accept the argument that this praying is a solution to stress, it definitely was not a solution for Jesus, because the more he prayed, the more stressed he became, the more in agony he became. So it's not like his stress was reducing the more he prayed. And Dan Raper actually even says that he had to increase the intensity of his prayers the more the stress was rising, and the more he rose, they increased the intensity, the more the stress became worse. So how is just praying and hoping that your problem will go away miraculously, how is that a solution? Because even in the case of Jesus, it definitely was not a solution.
Well, in our day, as we see stress at an all-time high, how can we imitate Jesus? How can we shoulder our responsibilities while managing the stress in our life? Well, let's discuss 3 steps to properly managing stress. They are assess, invest, and address. Again, that's assess, invest, and address.
So he's giving us these 3 steps to managing stress, and just to repeat again, he's repeated it, but for the purposes of me giving my comments, he says to assess, to invest, and to address. So assess, I can understand. Okay, you're going to assess what's causing you stress. But the second one, invest. Why are you investing in stress? You should be managing stress. You should be trying to reduce the stress as much as possible. But Dan Raper thinks that you need to be actually investing in stress. And he means that literally, as we're going to see in the talk. And then address, I can accept. Address, I can accept. But again, why are they encouraging people who are in a stressful environment to invest more in getting more stressed? That's just, it's not just weird, but it's also reckless advice.
First of all, assess your stress. Proverbs 4:7 says, with all that you acquire understanding. So we want to acquire understanding when it comes to our own stress. Now, the March 22, 1998 Awake article entitled Good Stress, Bad Stress is a very nice article that gives us insight into anxiety, maybe some of the anxieties we're facing. And the article analyzes 3 kinds of stress that we may face. And we'll touch on those 3 briefly. First, acute stress. This is the kind of stress that's temporary, comes up in everyday life. It could be from things like pending due date on a Bethel work project, or maybe a heavy teaching assignment like a convention or a memorial talk. This kind of stress is temporary, may not be pleasant, but usually it can be managed well.
So Dan Raper there gives us some examples of things that can cause you stress, and he is referencing this Awake, quite a dated Awake actually, from the 90s. And granted, in the 90s, and I guess maybe in the early 2000s, you had actually some valuable information in the Awake, because they used to research informations about medical disorders, about certain actual world problems, and I think they would try to get some expert opinion, or at the very least they were researching from secular organizations where some authorities on the subject were commenting on it. Although again, there was always a spin that was in favor of the ideas of the leaders, but you don't have that anymore. And this is why he has to reference such a dated publication in terms of stress. Now, the other thing I just need to also address is the fact that you have this individual who, as far as we know, has no credentials whatsoever so as to be giving people advice on stress, to be talking to people, to such a large audience where there will be literally thousands. I guess if you combined the the actual full-time Bethelites in the United States, plus the commuters and other people that would be listening to this, you could potentially have, definitely a good few thousand that are listening to this advice. And he's giving people this advice on stress when he has no qualifications or no credentials, as far as we know, to be giving that advice. And if he did, why is he not presenting his credentials? And just on the subject of credentials, I just have to mention that I can speak on this subject with some level of authority because I do have mental health qualifications. I have a master's degree in cognitive behavioral psychotherapy. I am actually an accredited mental health practitioner, CBT therapist, which in other places would be called like a licensed mental health practitioner. I work for the British National Health Service, so I do have some authority, and I do work with people who have stress, so I can comment on this subject with some level of authority, whereas Dan Raper is not giving us any credentials to allow us to listen to anything that he has to say. And even when he talks about it, he's not quoting from what actual experts in the field say about stress. He's quoting from a Jehovah's Witness publication, which has been written by volunteers at the United States, the writing department of the Jehovah's Witness organization, who in most cases have no qualifications on the subject. So that's the first thing that is quite alarming. Now, the other thing is, when he talks about things that cause people acute stress, he is mentioning things like due dates on a Bethel project. Now, again, so the question is, who is creating that stress? Who is putting that deadline? Now, granted that there may be some deadlines. Say, if, for example, some officials inspected Bethel and they found some things to be concerning in terms of hygiene and stuff, and then they put in those deadlines, I can accept that, okay, yes, it may be stressful to work towards such a deadline. But in many cases, what we see with these volunteers at Bethel is that the deadlines are very arbitrary. So, for example, there was a video that was leaked in relation to the production of the Jehovah's Witnesses cartoons, the Caleb and Sophia videos, and these people had such tight deadlines that the Bethelites were being forced to work up to 30 hours non-stop. And there is nothing bad that would happen if the Caleb and Sophia video is not produced by a certain date. And if you have an organization that claims that people will live forever in the future, that these publications are going to be used by people in the new world, why put such pressure on Bethelites, just creating unnecessary stress for them? And then the other thing he mentions is what he calls a heavy teaching assignment, such as, and he gives us an example, such as a memorial talk or a convention talk. Now, I have talked about this repeatedly, and I actually have shown examples on this channel indicating that these so-called talks, the presenters, the speakers are actually reading from an outline. They're pretty much reading word for word. So I don't understand why such a thing could be stressful when you have a convention talk or a memorial talk, which is pretty much scripted for you word for word. All you have to do is just read that outline and just create some enthusiasm. And if you were so stressed about it, usually in most bodies of elders, and particularly in the United States, where the audience that he's addressing, you would have a large body of elders there where would be capable of reading from that outline. So if you found it so stressful, why not let somebody else do it? But it's because these Bethelites want to be front and center, following the example of the governing body, that they want to be involved in all these other things, even if maybe, say, public speaking is not particularly their forte. So I don't accept that people should act too stressed about things like giving a talk when you're just reading from an outline. I guess there are other things that can cause people stress, like these unnecessary deadlines that the governing body and people like Dan Raper on the branch committee impose on these poor volunteers.
The second kind of stress in that article is chronic stress. This is not temporary, but long-term, ongoing stress. It could come from perhaps having to provide ongoing care for aging or sick parents. So we're providing this care that's ongoing for a family member, and it seems like the stress that comes with it has no end in sight. That's chronic stress. Now, chronic stress can accumulate over time and can surface without warning.
I think what he's saying there is all well and good of having to care for an ailing family member, say an aging parent, for example. I guess that can be stressful, but I just don't know whether he can speak with any authority on the subject, because people who work in Bethel, particularly people who are really high in the organization, they don't have that first-hand experience of caring for such an ailing or aging family member, because they are told to prioritize their career in special full-time service, such that you even have people where they've been sent to serve in another country as missionaries, and they effectively have to choose between caring for their family member or staying in special full-time service. And the encouragement is very heavily that they should stay in special full-time service. But on the other hand, if you have that responsibility of caring for a family member and you have some kind of role at Bethel, whatever the role is, maybe you're not a full-time, it could be that you're a full-time Bethelite like Dan Raper, or you're a commuter Bethelite, shouldn't the advice be prioritize your family member? Prioritize caring for your family member. Why are you then expected to have these additional responsibilities at Bethel and in the congregation and elsewhere when you have this heavy responsibility of caring for your family member? Because there will be other people who have the circumstances such that they can fulfill those roles. But again, because these things are seen as being very prestigious, these are privileges. If you are a commuter Bethelite, it's, oh, wow, what a privilege. If you're a full-time Bethelite, oh, wow, what a privilege. Because the leadership is encouraging this idea, this ambitious attitude, so people don't have the right priorities, and then they end up in some cases having either to abandon their family members who need that urgent support, or to end up having to juggle all these responsibilities in the name of maintaining the privileges. And that is what's creating the stress. And again, Dan Raper does nothing to address the source of that stress.
And then a third kind of stress in that article is traumatic stress. Traumatic stress is usually caused by our suffering a tragedy. It could be maybe losing a loved one in death, maybe losing a mate in death, or if we're involved in a serious car accident. Now, if we're experiencing chronic or traumatic stress, it might not be sufficient for someone to tell himself, just calm down, just relax, get yourself together. That would be kind of like trying to tell an insomniac, just go to sleep.
So again, as a mental health practitioner, I do agree with what Dan Raper said there at the end, that it's not enough to just tell somebody to calm down, to just relax. However, that is effectively what Dan Raper has already told us in this talk, and he will go on to make that same case as he continues in his talk, where he's just saying, well, Jesus just prayed. But that's the essence of that advice of just pray. It's essentially the same as just calm down, try and calm yourself down by doing something like praying or meditating, when it's not as simple as that. And especially when he's talking about things like traumatic stress. So for example, post-traumatic stress disorder is a very, very difficult mental health condition. And it's one of those mental health conditions where even when you seek the input of a mental health practitioner, a lot of people still continue having very severe difficulties with that. But does Dan Raper give us any practical advice whatsoever? No, the advice that he gives us effectively comes down to the same idea of calm down, relax, everything is going to be okay, just pray and just be a spiritual person. And we're going to hear this further in his comments.
Our second step, invest in stress. 1 Corinthians 12:25 says, the members of the body should have mutual concern, or literally, should be anxious over one another. So our goal is not to have zero stress, to be totally stress-free. That's not the aim. No, the Bible says we should have some anxiety. We need some stress to get things done from day to day. An appropriate amount of stress is like a freight train. It can drive us to fulfill assignments. It can move us to meet theocratic deadlines. It can compel us to work with an appropriate sense of urgency. We can harness proper stress to accomplish good in Jehovah's service. At times, we need to invest in stress. That's a part of properly managing it.
So according to Dan Raper, part of properly managing stress is investing in stress. Now, I guess you could say that I do agree with the essence of what he's saying, but it's just the way that he's phrasing it, that idea of investing in stress. I would actually argue that if I had a completely stress-free life, I don't think I would be complaining, and I don't think a lot of other people would be complaining if they had a stress-free life. So if, for example, I never had to worry about money. If I had no money issues whatsoever, I had no health issues whatsoever, I had no things that were that I needed to do very, very urgently, that put me under so much pressure and strain, I don't think I would be complaining, and neither would Dan Raper be complaining. And the reason stress arises is usually because sometimes it's because of lack of planning. So if you are traveling somewhere, let's say, for example, if you were going to the airport and you didn't plan your journey properly, such that you start running out of time, of course you're going to be stressed, and that might result in road rage. It might even, I don't know, lead to an accident in some cases because of careless driving. So that kind of lack of planning. Or you think about a student who does not prepare for their exams, who has not been studying throughout the semester, and then all of a sudden they're faced with an exam 2 days from now or the next day, then they're going to be stressed because of this lack of planning. However, if somebody planned their journey carefully and there were no mishaps on their journey to the airport, the likelihood is they're going to, even though the traveling can be stressful in of itself, the likelihood is they're not going to be as stressed as the person who hasn't planned their journey. Similarly, the student who has been studying throughout the semester and preparing, they're not going to be as stressed as the student who's left everything to the last minute. So this idea of investing in stress, I don't think that is wise advice. I think we cannot escape stress in life, but you can do things to minimize your stress. For example, even in a work environment, if your work was producing so much stress, you can, for example, try and find an alternative type of employment, if that is at all possible, so that this thing is not producing as much stress, the work situation. And the same, Dan Raper, as a member of the United States Branch Committee, he and his fellow branch committee members, in consultation with the governing body, should be thinking of creating a work environment that has the least stress. If I know we cannot eliminate stress, but trying to minimize that source of stress. But what he's actually saying is actually do more, and just use that stress to do more for free labor for the organization. And I personally think that is reckless advice, especially given that Dan Raper has not shown us any credentials that he can speak with any authority on this subject.
And then a third step to manage stress: address the stress. What if stress becomes overwhelming and it begins to manifest itself in irritability or anger in how we deal with our coworkers? Or what if we become so over-focused in our own anxiety that we're unaware of someone who's in need of our encouragement? Or what if it begins to affect our approachableness so that those who need to confide in us are reluctant to do so? Well, if we start to see some of those signs, it's time to address the stress. And how do we do that? How do we get off the roller coaster track and onto the train track like a freight train?
So now he's giving us some actual symptoms of stress, and it seems like this is an actual issue at the United States Bethel, and maybe other Bethels in other parts of the world, but definitely at the United States Bethel, that they're dedicating this whole talk to address it. And he's telling us the signs of that stress, like irritability, lack of approachability, and so on. My argument is, where are the branch committee, where are the governing body in allowing Bethelites, who are supposed to be the cream of the cream, who are supposed to be the best example of Jehovah's Witness living, in allowing them to end up being in such a stressful situation, such that this stress is actually being physically manifested in their behavior. So the first thing they should do is actually, as I've already mentioned, is ensuring that the work environment is not producing stress in the first place. And granted, when the stress is noticed, yes, you can text steps to try and address that stress. But I think, given everything they say about Bethel and it being the house of God and it being the best working environment ever, I've heard these expressions, and I'm sure some of you viewers have heard similar expressions in terms of the way they talk about how great it is a privilege to work at Bethel, and how Jehovah, meaning the governing body, is the best employer ever. The fact that they have let things escalate to such an extent that they're having to address this now shows me that these are actually irresponsible leaders. Dan Raper, the rest of the United States Branch Committee, the governing body, they are irresponsible leaders that are not to be entrusted with the welfare of anyone.
Well, consider 4 steps to address the stress. First, avoid unproductive methods. If you think about Jesus, the last night of his life, consider a couple of things that Jesus did not do with that really intense stress. First, Jesus did not ignore the stress. No, he addressed it head on through intense reliance on Jehovah. And that's the example for us. We don't want to sweep the stress under the rug, hide from it, pretend it's not there. No, we want to address it head on like Jesus did.
So according to Dan Raper, Jesus addressed the stress head on. How did he address the stress head on? We're told that his stress just kept getting worse and worse and worse, to the extent that he developed hematidrosis, to the extent that his sweat became as drops of blood. He did nothing to address the stress. He was praying for this thing to be removed, and Jehovah did nothing to address the stress in terms of trying to help him relax or to remove this actual thing that was causing him the stress. And this is the same attitude that Dan Raper and the rest of the US Branch Committee have, where they don't look at actually what's causing the stress. They don't look at the root cause. They are just treating the symptoms or trying in some way to address the symptoms when they could be looking at what is actually the root cause of this problem. So I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I don't accept that Jesus addressed the stress.
Also, on that last night, Jesus turned to Jehovah, not to alcohol. So we don't want to rely or become dependent on alcohol to cope with stress. That is not an appropriate way to address the stress.
So now he is just writing things into the Bible. Where does it even talk about, alcohol ever being an issue? The only way that example would be relevant if the example he was addressing had any mention of alcohol as being a problematic way of dealing with that situation, but that just was not the case. Now, the actual reason why Dan Raper is saying, well, Jesus did not turn to alcohol, is because alcohol is a big problem at not just the United States Bethel, but at all Bethel facilities throughout the world. It is a known secret that Bethelites are under so much stress, they're under so much pressure, they're under this environment where they have to always pretend to be a spiritual and to act in a certain way so as to portray this level of spirituality, and also because the level of expectation is just so high, and also because you're in this unnatural environment, Bethelites invariably tend to resort to alcohol to deal with this situation of being in Bethel. And this is why he brings this up, Jesus did not turn to alcohol. How is that even relevant? There is no reason to talk about it. It's not like there were people around Jesus that were resorting to alcohol and then Jesus says, no, this is the way to do it. He would only say that if alcohol is a big problem. But it is very, very interesting that we have an actual high-ranking Jehovah's Witness at a Bethel facility actually admitting on camera that alcohol is a big problem at the United States Bethel. And the thing is, he very flippantly, you could say, it just addresses this very serious subject, whereas with other things he has tried to give some superficial type of solutions. With alcohol, he's just said, well, we just don't want to turn to alcohol. But alcohol can be alcoholism can be a medical condition on its own. It can be a mental health issue on its own. And what they needed to do is they should have brought in an expert on the subject, or at least brought in some expert information on the subject of, if you're having difficulties with alcohol, this is what you need to do to address that problem. These are the professionals you can turn to. So they're just almost just saying to Bethelites, using alcohol is kind of like a spiritual problem, not realizing that for some people it can be a medical condition, it can be a mental health condition where you need expert input in terms of addressing this problem. The other thing is they also don't address the root cause, as I've already mentioned. They don't address the root cause of the problem. They're not sitting down as a United States branch committee and thinking, why is it that our staff are resorting to alcohol, which I think most responsible organizations would do. Is if they had such a problem as apparently they have at Bethel, they would be looking at why is it that we have, I don't know, maybe 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, I don't know how many, but it's obviously clearly a big problem. Why are they not assessing what's leading people into this alcoholism? It's again the environment that they've created. But again, Dan Raper and the rest of the branch committee, the governing body, they don't want to take responsibility for the issues they are creating by creating this high pressure, toxic, artificial environment that's pushing people towards alcoholism. They don't want to take any responsibility for that. They're putting the blame fairly, unfairly, but squarely on the feet of these poor Bethelites, these poor volunteer staff members.
And another thing, the last night of Jesus' life in that really intense stress, Jesus did not walk away from his responsibilities. Now, it can be easy to think when we're overwhelmed with stress, well, if I have too much stress, it must mean I have too much responsibility, as if the only way to reduce our stress is to get rid of responsibility. But now, it is true, we do need to be modest. And that might mean sometimes saying no to something if it's clear that it's going to be more than what we can handle. But whatever is within our power, we want to strive to imitate Jesus and shoulder the responsibility, continue to shoulder the responsibility while managing the stress involved.
Now, I guess this is one of the most shocking and I would say very disappointing things that I heard from Dan Raper in terms of the advice he's giving to Bethel staff members in terms of handling the stress. So he almost ridicules people who step aside from these responsibilities because of the stress. Sometimes stepping aside from a responsibility can be the only way of managing the stress, or even if you're not able to step aside from the responsibility completely, reducing the amount of responsibility can be a way of managing stress. And even in so-called worldly organizations, in secular organizations like the organization I work in, if somebody is experiencing work-related stress, sometimes employers who are actually paying you money, they do make concessions where they actually reduce your workload, or even if it's just for a short period of time, they reduce it so that you are able to, regain your mental health, your well-being, and you're in a position to be more productive. Because what ends up happening is if the responsibility continues to be the same, when someone is already experiencing stress, what ends up happening is people experience burnout, and the burnout leads these people to end up being signed off sick. So it might even be better for an organization, even the Jehovah's Witness organization, dare I say, to reduce the responsibility that these people are facing. And as I've mentioned, some of these responsibilities are fairly mundane. So, for example, there is no reason why a Bethelite should be on a convention committee, or there's no reason why a Bethelite should insist on giving a memorial talk when there's other elders that can do that. So they can just be reasonable in terms of the workload that they're giving these people, and also be reasonable in terms of telling these Bethelites not to take on additional responsibilities in the congregation. So you actually have situations where a Bethelite who has heavy responsibilities at Bethel has also big responsibilities in the congregation. And an example I can think of is Mark Numer, the helper to the teaching committee of the governing body. So Mark Numer is very busy, and understandably I don't agree with most of the things that he works on producing, but it is evident that he's extremely busy at Bethel, because he's not only a helper to a committee of the governing body, he is also a Gilead instructor. He's not just a Gilead instructor, he is actually the overseer of the Theocratic Schools department, meaning that he oversees not just the Gilead school, but he oversees all the sort of what they call theocratic schools all over the world that the Jehovah's Witnesses run. done. And when it comes to his actual responsibilities, I had a brother who went to Gilead a few years ago, and maybe that situation has changed now, but when he went to Gilead, he said he went to a congregation in which Mark Numer served in that congregation. And at what position did Mark Numer serve as? He was the coordinator of the body of elders, as if there is no other elder who can be the coordinator in that congregation, even though he's heavily involved in producing the propaganda material. He has a full-time teaching job at the Gilead, but he just has to be the coordinator. And the simple thing he could do is just not be the coordinator and let another elder who has less responsibility be coordinator. But no, these people want to be front and center, and they're encouraged to do that. And then they're surprised that people are experiencing stress. They're surprised that people are resorting to alcohol to deal with their stress.
A second step to address the stress, please turn with me to Joshua 1:8. Joshua 1:8. And this verse assures us that we can successfully cope with stress and anxiety. Joshua 1:8, it says, "This book of the law should not depart from your mouth, and you must read it in an undertone day and night, in order to observe carefully all that is written in it, for then your way will be successful, and then you will act wisely." So the end of the verse says, you will be successful, you will act wisely. Yes, we can successfully cope with stress, wisely deal with anxiety, if we do what? If we do what the beginning of the verse says. It says at the beginning of the verse, "This book of the law, you must read it day and night." So that's our second step to address the stress, having a consistent, solid habit of reading the Bible every day.
So again, it's the fact that these Jehovah's Witness leaders are effectively in an echo chamber where they just listen to their own crazy ideas, and effectively everybody else that listens to them either is on board with those ideas or cannot challenge those ideas for this fear of losing their positions. Because if this individual, Dan Raper, could listen to what he's saying with a bit of self-awareness, I wonder if he would even have the courage to come on camera and spout this nonsense. So we're talking about Bethelites who have unnecessary, arbitrary deadlines, tight deadlines, and from that leaked video, we even know of people being forced to work 30 hours non-stop so as to produce these Caleb and Sophia videos. And these people are actually resorting to alcohol because of the stress, and yet his advice is give them more stuff that's going to give them more work that's going to give them more stress. So he's saying now you have to be consistent with your Bible reading. So it's not enough that you already have too much on your plate that you can't handle. You know the bucket is about to overflow with the stress. Now we're going to stress you more with this expectation, again another arbitrary expectation of you having to read the Bible every day. And it doesn't end there. It's not just a case of reading the Bible. Let's hear what he has to say more on this subject.
But to really get the benefits of daily Bible reading, to manage stress, is it enough to just read the Bible to check it off the list? Well, again, in that verse in Joshua 1:8, it says you must read in an undertone day and night, or meditate on it. So that might mean when we do our daily Bible reading, it may mean slowing down, thinking deeply about what we read, so that we can find that gem that's going to help us get through those stressful days.
So according to Dan Raper, it's not enough to just read the Bible. It's not enough just to read a few verses of the Bible every day. Even though you have this heavy workload at Bethel, you have these expectations to even do more in the congregation, in the circuit, at convention level. You're resorting to alcohol to deal with those problems. It's not enough to just read a few verses of the Bible a day. You also have to fixate on those verses that you're reading, just like Dan Raper was fixating on Luke 22, verse 44. And then what Jehovah's Witnesses say, when they talk about finding a gem, it's finding themselves as Jehovah's Witnesses or as Bethelites in those scriptures, even if those scriptures have no relevance whatsoever to the Jehovah's Witnesses. So for example, the last time I went to the meetings, they were going through the book of Job, and they were just finding themselves in the book of Job, even though that experience that Job had was totally relevant to any Jehovah's Witness experience. And what a Bethelite would be expected to do would be to read any obscure Bible verse, like, I don't know, maybe something from the book of Obadiah or the book of Nahum or the book of Habakkuk, and then find how their Bethel job, so if they work in the laundry at Bethel, they have to find how that scripture applies to their work in the laundry at Bethel. That is the level of expectation that Dan Raper, the rest of the US branch committee, the governing body, have on these poor Bethel staff members. And then they're surprised. They wonder why people are so stressed. They wonder why people are resorting to alcohol to deal with their stress.
A third step to address the stress, Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail when there is no consultation or confidential talk. So we need confidential talk. We need a confidant, someone who we can honestly and openly confide in, someone who can give us an outside perspective on our situation. Now, one confidant that we all want, we all need to confide in Jehovah. Having Jehovah as a confidant is absolutely essential to cope with stress. We think about Jesus, the last night of his life, he kept praying more earnestly. He confided in Jehovah. So one JW.org article gives a suggestion that when we're under intense stress, we can write out a list of all the things that are causing us stress. And then we can pray to Jehovah about each item one by one, explaining each source of anxiety and begging for his help to address each of them.
So he starts off well by talking about speaking to a confidant, but then he nullifies all that advice by then saying, well, you just need to speak to Jehovah. And I'm not going to labor this point and repeat myself, but as I've said in that example, it is not a fitting example. It's not like when Jesus was praying, his stress was reducing, his stress was actually increasing. So he wants you to do the same thing. He wants you to speak to somebody who may or may not be listening to you, and that actually takes precedence over talking to somebody who may be able to listen, who you know is actually listening to you, who is empathizing with you, who may be able to offer you some advice or some useful information in terms of dealing with your stress. You're supposed to prioritize this praying to Jehovah where it's not a two-way communication, where you don't know what his thoughts are about what you're telling him, and he's not giving you any actual direct response. And then he starts to say this thing about writing out this list, which I guess is a good thing, and I will maybe go through some actual advice from actual qualified professionals in terms of dealing with stress. And that's one of the strategies we use in problem solving, is actually identifying the problems, listing the problems, but we don't just say write down those problems and then just talk into, okay, pray about the problems and expect that those problems are just going to magically disappear. What we say when we talk about a problem solving approach to stress management is, when you identify the problem, then you start thinking about solutions, and you think about a variety of solutions. So for any problem, they could be not just one solution, they could potentially be 3, 4, maybe 5 solutions, and no one solution is ideal. So what you then have to think about is just trying to pick the best solution. So what you could do is you could, when you come up with a solution, you can write the pros of that solution and the cons of that solution. And it's a case of picking the solution that has the most advantages and the least disadvantages. That's a problem solving approach. So if Dan Raper was saying something like that, I would be 100% on board with it. But this idea of, you write down the problems and then you just pray about each of those problems individually, how is that going to solve anything? How is it? So if you have an example he gave of something that causes stress is an ailing family member. So if you have an ailing family member and you just write that ailing family member and then just pray, Jehovah, I have this ailing family member, how is that going to reduce any of the stress that you're experiencing? So again, this advice I think is not only useless, but it is also reckless.
Well, a fourth step to address the stress, practical measures and provisions. Take advantage of practical measures and provisions. Things like getting regular exercise, getting outside to enjoy creation, having sufficient rest and sleep. Now, for those in the Bethel family, there is no better provision for this than the 5-hour allotment from the governing body. What an incredible provision we have to help us to manage stress and anxiety.
So I think most of those things that Dan Raper is referring to, like getting out in the fresh air, having regular exercise, and so on, all those things are all well and good. But again, he's forgetting the fact that they're the ones that are creating this stress by putting all this pressure, these unnecessary responsibilities on their own staff members. And also, again, you can't get through an event like this without any governing body worship. So they refer to this 5-hour allotment, and it comes up again, I think, pretty much in all the 3 talks. But apparently people should be grateful and worship the governing body because they've loosened their grip on how controlling they are of the Bethelites. And I think they've given them, I don't understand this 5-hour allotment, and maybe somebody in the comments can clarify what it is, but I think they've given them something like 5 hours in the week that they can be flexible with, so they can maybe, I don't know, take time off where you maybe take an hour off every day if it's a weekly allotment, or if it's a monthly allotment. I don't know exactly the ins and outs, but I don't know why that is praiseworthy for the governing body, because just a few years back they expected Bethelites to even work on a Saturday. So it wasn't enough to just work Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 5. They were also expected to work every other Saturday, and it's only, I guess, when they realized that people were too stressed, that people were too burnt out, that they removed the Saturday, and then they've introduced this flexible arrangement of taking some time off. I guess that's what it is. But again, if this is Jehovah's organization and this is the best employer in the world, why did they not realize that these things were needed in the first place? And they're just catching up with what they call worldly employers are already doing and being flexible with their expectations of time management from their employees. And apparently we're supposed to worship the governing body because they have eventually realized that the working environments were not conducive for their staff members.
But what if, despite all of these efforts, a person has ongoing, persistent, overwhelming stress? Well, it may be that the final practical measure that's really needed is what Luke 5:31 says. It says there, "Those who are healthy do not need a physician, but those who are ill do." It may be that the practical measure that's really needed is getting medical help. Now, for some, there may be a stigma about getting medical help to deal with anxiety, but we would never want a stigma to be the thing that holds us back from getting the help we truly need, when what a person really needs may be a doctor, a therapist, or maybe medicine.
Now, of all the comments he's made, and there's been a lot of infuriating comments, I think these are probably the most infuriating, irritating, dare I say even disgusting comments that he makes. So first of all, he's laboring the point that it may be that you need medical intervention. Would he be saying the same thing if somebody had broken their leg? Would he be saying it may be that you need to go to a doctor? Or if somebody was diagnosed with cancer, would he be saying, well, it may be that you need to go and see a doctor? Why is he relegating somebody's mental health to it may be that you need to see somebody? And then he talks about a stigma. And again, this is the victim blaming mentality that you have from the Jehovah's Witness leadership. So who creates this stigma when it comes to seeking support for your mental health? The stigma is created by the leaders themselves, because invariably when they talk about talking to a mental health professional, he doesn't do this in this talk, but in the publications in the past, invariably what they would say is you have to make sure that this professional is on board with our teachings as Jehovah's Witnesses. And they would say, well, some professionals might give advice that would be contrary to the Jehovah's Witness teaching, or they could say that this mental health professional might be actually stating that the problem is the religion itself. And it could be for a Bethelite, if they went to a mental health professional and talked to them about their issues with stress, it could be that this professional might actually say, well, actually, it is this environment that you're in that is the source of your stress, and maybe you might think about removing yourself from such a toxic, high-pressure environment, and that is why they've always caveated that advice with or be careful which professional you see. And granted, Dan Raper does not do that. However, he should not be blaming the Jehovah's Witnesses for having this stigma to the mental health, because this stigma has been created by the leadership itself. And also, this is the first thing he should have been speaking about when he started his talk. This should have been the first advice he should have given, to tell people to seek support from a mental health practitioner if they are dealing with stress that is, just getting out of control. So what I'm going to do is, I think it might be helpful for us to just have a look at what actual medical experts or professionals would have said if they were trying to give advice on stress and stress management. So I'm going to take you to an information sheet, a worksheet that's been provided by the Center for Clinical Interventions. This is an Australian organization, and you cannot see, because of the graphics on this software, you cannot see the website there, but the website is www.cci.health.wa.gov.au, and I'm going to put a link in the description to this video. And I'm just going to show you that this information is legitimate. So it says here that the Centre for Clinical Interventions is a specialised clinical psychology service in Perth, Western Australia, administered through the North Metropolitan Health Service. Our service has 4 core areas, and let's just go to those 4 core areas. Let's do that. So it develops and provides evidence-based treatments to adults experiencing anxiety, mood, and eating disorders. It conducts clinically applied research to improve psychological interventions, provides training and supervision for health practitioners, and also it develops evidence-based online resources to support practitioners delivering psychological interventions and self-help materials. So this is legit. You can trust the advice that is coming from this website, and I'm just going to show you some of the qualifications of the staff. So I'm not going to show you all the staff members, but as you can see, everybody that's listed here as a staff member that's clinical, they have qualifications, either a doctorate or a master's or high level qualifications in mental health in mental health subjects. So you can trust the material that they produce. So I'm going to take you to a worksheet that they've produced that deals with stress and stress management. And they have blown this up, but the title of this worksheet is Coping with Stress, and I'm going to put a link in the description. And one of the things that they help you identify very early on is the stressors, the actual things that are causing stress, and it is important that you identify what's causing the stress, because if you can remove the thing that's causing the stress, then that is a first step in reducing the stress. So there's relationships, work-related stress, study demands, illness, and so on, juggling many roles or tasks at the same time. And these are some of the things that Dan Raper acknowledged, but he did not acknowledge that those were the issue. He acknowledged that the stress response was the issue among the Bethel staff members. And let's see how their advice compares to the advice that Dan Raper is giving to Bethelites. So stress management tips: identify your stressors. So identify the things that are causing you the stress. And it says here, perhaps you can control some aspects, so of course sometimes you can't change the situation, like changing your job, but it says you can control some aspects. But if you can change it, it's even better. If you can remove the actual stressor, then that is probably the ideal solution. Then these are some of the things that he talked about: regular exercise, eating and sleeping well, taking time out for family, friends, and recreation activities, which the Bethelites are not being given an opportunity. And then it talks about problem-solving techniques. So this is what I was talking about, problem solving, where you identify the problems, you brainstorm possible solutions, and then you choose one to put into action after listing the pros and cons of each option. But according to Dan Raper, all you have to do is list those things, read out the list to Jehovah in prayer, and that would help you in coping with stress. And then there is calming techniques. We have breathing, controlled breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, training your mind to become more relaxed. And these are things that a professional can help you develop. Of course, you can develop these skills on your own, but a mental health professional can also help you with those. And then there's assertiveness training and communication skills. These can help you deal with challenges more effectively, thereby reducing stress. And one of the things that assertiveness training can help you with is not taking on more responsibility, being assertive when you're being given responsibility that you cannot realistically deal with without being stressed or burnt out. And then it also says to consider whether there is negative thinking which is contributing to your stress. And in the Jehovah's Witness religion, definitely one of the things that could be classified as negative thinking is people always thinking that they're not good enough, that they need to do more, they need to do better in terms of what they're doing for the organization. So that sort of negative thinking can also be a massive contributor to stress. So as you can see, when you look at actual advice from people who are qualified, who have studied this field, who have received qualifications, who have actual clinical experience in helping people manage their stress, they're actually giving actual practical solutions, and they actually even give this stuff free of charge. So CCI, for example, you can get these worksheets free of charge without having to pay anything for it. But people like Dan Raper, they're actually interested in you thinking that the only way you can manage your stress is by listening to the advice he gives you. So they won't alert you to such resources that can actually provide you actual useful information that can be of benefit to yourself. So yeah, so I think it's really, really concerning that such a high-ranking member of the United States Bethel family can come on the platform and just talk such nonsense without actually providing any real and practical support to people who are experiencing stress, when the help, as I've just illustrated here, is readily available if you just consult the right people. And also the fact that he's relegating the importance of seeking support from a mental health professional to the very last comments he makes on this subject. And also he says it may be, when he should be saying it should be, you should be seeking advice if you are dealing with uncontrolled stress in this environment.
Yes, with Jehovah's help, we can go from the roller coaster to the freight train.
So there he goes again with this useless, irrelevant example of the roller coaster and the freight train. So I'm going to end my comments there. And I'm going to produce a part 2. So the part 2 to this rebuttal will be much shorter, because the comments that I selected that I was from the speakers that to comment on are briefer in duration, and I don't have too much to say on that. They're not as alarming as what we've been subjected to here from Dan Raper. So look out for the part 2, which will be out in a few days' time, apart from this actual video. So what I want to say is, I just want to say a huge thanks to the Bethel Insider that has leaked this footage to myself. So it helps us understand what are some of the issues that they are contending with there at Bethel, and it kind of gives us a context of where the so-called spiritual food is coming from, and how spiritual these actual people that are, because of stress, are resorting to heavy use of alcohol really are. So I think that was quite revealing. So I'm really, really grateful to this insider for providing this as this footage providing me this footage that I am able to share with you. So I will be back for a part 2 of this video. Please don't forget to like this video, don't forget to subscribe, to share this video if you can, and please also give your comments in the comment section, because I want to hear what you have to say about this. And even if you want to challenge me on some of the things that I've said in the video, some of the statements I've made, please, I accept those challenges, as long as you can obviously I can't give rules as to what you say in your comments, but if you want me to engage with you in any meaningful way in terms of you challenging me, I expect first of all that you're respectful to me. I think that's a reasonable thing to ask. And also if you stick to the topic, or at least some kind of subject that's relevant to what I discuss on this channel, then I'll be more inclined to engage with those comments. So, but please continue to like, to subscribe to the channel, to share these videos if you think they can be helpful to anyone else. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna let Tony Morris do the honors for us.
Hey. That's Jehovah's enemies. They're going to vanish like smoke.
But you can't do that, said one of the critics.
It doesn't bother me.
Really? Again? Really?
Look at that little enemy of God.
Somehow we dilly and dally. Takes us years, and we wonder why.
What are you waiting for?